You get the first real bump, a bonus that clears, a raise that sticks, a business that finally turns a profit 2 quarters in a row. And for about 6 weeks, you feel dangerous. You've got room now, and the money goes to the obvious places: a nicer car, a better phone, a watch you'd have laughed at a year ago. Dinners that used to be occasions become Tuesdays. Subscriptions stack up because canceling one now feels petty. None of that is wrong exactly. It's just not what worth it means. And a year later, when someone asks what changed financially, the honest answer is usually not much. The balance moved sideways while the lifestyle moved up, because there's a second list, a quieter one. Nobody posts about it. It doesn't photograph well, and almost none of it changes how your life looks from the outside. But dollar for dollar, it's where extra money actually does something. It protects what you've built, or it compounds, or it buys back years you'd otherwise lose to a mistake you didn't know you were making. 10 things on that list. None of them are exciting. All of them are worth more than the watch, and most of them cost less than it did. A handful cost nothing at all, beyond the 20 minutes it takes to actually deal with them, which is usually the entire reason they're still undone. And before the first one, this is the whole filter for everything that follows. Does the math hold up when you actually run it? That's it. That's the only bar something has to clear to make this list. If a list like that is useful to you, staying subscribed just means the next one shows up when it's ready. Here's the first one, and it costs you nothing to fix. Number 1, where your cash actually sits. Most people with a growing bank balance never move it out of the account their paycheck already lands in. It feels handled. It isn't costing anything obvious, which is exactly why it survives unexamined for years. But a standard checking account is paying close to nothing, often a few hundredths of a percent, while a high-yield savings account at an FDIC-insured bank has been paying somewhere around 4% this year. Same insurance up to the standard coverage limit, same safety, same ability to move it in a day. The only difference is that one of them is actually paying you for holding your money, and one isn't. Sit $40,000 in the account paying near zero for a year, and you've made pocket change. Sit that same $40,000 in an account paying 4%, and you've made about $1,600 for doing precisely nothing except filling out one form. Some people take it a step further into short-term treasury bills, which pay a similar rate and skip state income tax on the interest. A small additional edge with no meaningful additional risk. One thing worth checking before you move anything: a lot of high-yield accounts advertise a promotional rate for the first 3 months that quietly drops afterward, so the number that matters is the ongoing rate, not the one in the headline. That's not a hot tip. That's just correcting an oversight most people never revisit once their balance gets big enough for the oversight to actually cost something. That's one form. Here's something most people are getting wrong every single month without noticing. Number 2, the deductible on your health plan. When money was tight, the plan with the lowest monthly premium made sense. You were optimizing for the bill you knew was coming every month, not the one you might never see. Once there's a cushion, that math flips. A lower deductible plan costs more every paycheck and less the moment something actually happens. And if your plan is HSA eligible, the account attached to it is arguably the single most underused piece of paper in personal finance. Money goes in pre-tax, it grows untouched, and if it's spent on medical costs, it comes out untaxed too. 3 tax advantages stacked on one account, which nothing else in the tax code does. For 2026, the contribution limit sits at $4,400 for an individual and $8,750 for a family, with an extra $1,000 allowed after 55. Most people either don't fund it or treat it like a checking account and spend it the same year. Left alone and invested, it becomes a second retirement account. And here's the detail almost nobody uses. You can pay a medical bill out of pocket today, keep the receipt, let the account grow for 20 years, and reimburse yourself for that same bill decades later, completely tax-free, whenever you want. And if your plan isn't HSA eligible, the fallback is a flexible spending account instead. No rollover magic, but still pre-tax dollars for expenses you were going to pay anyway, which is money that would otherwise just be taxed and spent. Revisiting the deductible and actually funding whichever account applies is one form and one decision, worth more than almost anything you could buy with the same few $1,000s. Number 3, how much term life insurance you're carrying, if any. This isn't the whole life pitch sold at the same kitchen table every year. It's the plain version, a 20 or 30-year term policy that pays out a fixed amount if you die inside the term and simply expires if you don't. For a healthy person in their 30s, $1 million of 20-year term runs somewhere around $350 to $700 a year, often less than a single month of the car payment that already left the driveway. What it buys is specific. The people who depend on your income don't have to rebuild their entire life around the version where you're not there. Most people either have none or whatever amount their employer quietly attached to their paycheck years ago, usually 1 or 2 times salary, and usually tied to that job, meaning it disappears the day you leave it, regardless of your health at the time. That's nowhere close to what it would take to replace a decade of income for the people counting on it. Running that number properly, once, and closing the gap with a policy that follows you and not your employer is one of the cheapest fixes on this entire list relative to what it protects. Some people also split coverage into 2 policies instead of one. A 20-year term for the years a mortgage is outstanding, layered with a shorter one for the years kids are dependent. So the coverage shrinks roughly in line with the need instead of paying for a flat amount the whole way through. Most people plan for the wrong emergency entirely. Number 4, disability coverage. The policy almost nobody thinks to check. Here's a statistic worth sitting with. Over a career, the odds of a serious injury or illness taking someone out of work for an extended stretch are meaningfully higher than the odds of dying during that same window. Life insurance gets bought constantly. Disability insurance barely gets mentioned. If your income stops for a year, everything else on this list stops with it. The HSA, the savings rate, the investing, all of it paused at the exact moment you can least afford a pause. Some employers offer a base policy, but it's often short-term only or capped at a fraction of what you actually earn or written as any occupation, meaning it only pays if you can't work any job at all, not specifically yours. An individual, own occupation policy typically runs 1% to 3% of income annually. Whether the payout is taxed later depends entirely on whether you paid the premium yourself or your employer did. If the employer pays it, the benefit generally counts as taxable income when you receive it, which quietly shrinks the real payout by whatever bracket you're in. Worth checking either way, because it changes what the coverage is actually worth to you. That premium is the cost of making sure the rest of this list doesn't collapse the moment your income does. None of that matters much if one bad afternoon can take it all anyway. Number 5, an umbrella liability policy. This one scales specifically with the fact that you now have more to lose. Auto and home policies cap their liability coverage at a few $100,000, often $300,000 by default, a number set for someone with far less net worth than you may now have. An umbrella policy sits on top of those and extends that protection, often to $1 million or more, for a small annual cost, commonly $250 to $500 a year for the first million in coverage. The purpose is narrow and specific. It exists for the version of your life where a car accident that isn't fully your fault or an injury on your property turns into a claim that exceeds what your base policies cover and reaches into the assets you've spent years building instead of stopping at the policy limit. Lawsuits involving serious injury regularly settle or get awarded well into 6 figures, and a base policy that stops at $300,000 doesn't come close to covering that once legal cost and lost income claims are added on top. Nobody buys it expecting to need it. That's the entire point of insurance. The value shows up in the 1 year you'd otherwise be paying the difference out of the savings and investments you've spent years building, which defeats the purpose of having built them. Number 6, the paperwork that says what happens to everything if you're gone. A will. Updated beneficiary designations on every retirement and investment account. A power of attorney and a healthcare directive. And if you have kids, a named guardian. None of it is expensive. A basic estate plan through an attorney commonly runs a few hundred to around $1,000, and the beneficiary forms cost nothing at all. Yet the majority of adults under 55 have none of it in place because it requires sitting with an uncomfortable scenario for 20 minutes. Here's the part that makes it worth doing once real money is involved. Without a will, a state's default succession rules decide who gets what, in what order, and how fast, not you, and not necessarily who you'd have chosen. Skip that paperwork entirely, and an estate can sit in probate for the better part of a year, with legal and court costs quietly taking a percentage off the top before anyone inherits anything. And a beneficiary form specifically overrides a will. An old 401k, still listing an ex or a parent from a decade-old form, sends the money there regardless of what the will says. It's a document problem, not a money problem, and it's the cheapest item on this entire list. It's also worth a 5-minute check after any major life change: marriage, a new child, a divorce, a home purchase, since none of these documents update themselves, and the version sitting on file from 5 years ago may no longer reflect who you'd actually choose today, so who's actually taking a cut of what's left? Number 7. What you're actually paying to invest. Once a portfolio gets large enough, the fee attached to it stops being a rounding error and becomes one of the biggest expenses in your financial life. Almost invisible because it never arrives as a bill. It's baked into the fund's return before you ever see the number, or quietly debited from the account each quarter without a receipt in sight. A portfolio paying a combined 1.5% a year in fund expenses and advisory fees versus one paying 0.2% doesn't just cost the difference, it costs the growth that difference would have compounded into over decades. On $500,000, assuming a 7% return held for 25 years, that 1.3-point gap is the difference between roughly $1.15 million and $2.24 million. Same starting balance, same market, same everything except the fee. The fee is the entire gap. Start smaller and it still adds up. On $100,000 over that same stretch, the same gap is worth over $200,000 by the end, which is real money for a number most people never bother to look up. This doesn't mean advice has no value. Some of it clearly does, particularly around tax and estate planning, which don't show up on a performance chart. It means knowing exactly what you're paying in dollars per year, not just as a percentage, and weighing that honestly against what you're actually getting for it. It's also worth knowing the fee model isn't fixed. A flat annual fee or an hourly rate for planning exists, alongside the traditional percentage of asset structure. And on a large enough balance, a flat fee can end up costing a fraction of what a percentage would. Now, for the one that hides until it's too late in the year to fix. Number 8. Who's actually doing your taxes? Simple W-2 income, a standard deduction done in 20 minutes with software. That setup barely benefits from a professional. But once there's a business, rental property, equity compensation, or multiple income streams, the return itself stops being the hard part. The strategy across the full year is the hard part, and software filed in April doesn't do that. A CPA or enrolled agent handling that level of complexity typically costs somewhere between $800 and $2,500 a year, and the value usually isn't found at filing time. It's found in July or October when a decision about timing income, harvesting a loss, adjusting quarterly estimated payments, or structuring a retirement contribution gets made months before the deadline instead of discovered too late to act on. At a certain point, this isn't an expense. It's the one category on this list that's designed to pay for itself, often several times over. It also matters for a narrower reason. Once income stops being a single, evenly withheld paycheck, quarterly estimated payments become your responsibility, and missing them brings a penalty from the IRS that a professional would have flagged months in advance. Number 9. The health screenings you keep meaning to schedule. This sits on a financial list because your income, for most of your working life, is the largest asset you own, larger than the house, larger than the portfolio, and the one everything else on this list depends on. An annual physical, routine blood work, and the age-appropriate screenings that come with your 30s, 40s, and beyond cost little or nothing under most insurance plans, and their entire purpose is catching the expensive problem while it's still the cheap problem. A screening that costs a copay can catch something that, found later, costs tens of thousands of dollars and months of income to treat. Skipping the appointment doesn't save money, it defers a bill, and the deferred version is almost always larger. In dollars and in time, you don't get back. Some employers even offer a small incentive or a premium discount just for completing an annual wellness visit, which turns this from a cost into something closer to a rebate. Everything else on this list is about protecting money you've already made. This one is about protecting the thing that produces it in the first place. 9 down, and every single one has been about defense, holding on to what's already yours. The last one breaks that pattern completely, and it might be the most valuable item on the entire list. Number 10. A skill that raises what an hour of your time is worth. Every item so far has been defensive, protecting what already exists. This one compounds. A certification, a course, a credential relevant to your field, something with a real checkable cost, usually a few hundred to a few $1,000s, that measurably increases your earning capacity. Run it simply. A $2,000 course that leads to a $6,000 annual raise pays for itself in 4 months and keeps paying every year after, without sitting exposed the way a market position does during a downturn. Check first whether an employer offers tuition or professional development reimbursement. Many do, tax-free up to $5,250 a year under current law, which can make the real cost to you zero, and a growing number of employers also tie that benefit directly to promotion cycles. So the same course that raises your skill can also be the documented reason for the raise itself. Worth being precise here too. Not every course delivers that outcome, and the ones that do are tied to a specific, verifiable skill gap in your actual field, not a general promise printed on a landing page. Priced correctly, it's the only item on this list that doesn't just protect the number you've already built. It raises the ceiling on the number you're building next, and unlike a raise you wait on someone else to approve, it's the one item here that's entirely in your own hands. Run back through all 10, and the pattern is the same every time. A form, a policy, a document, a decision. Each one small on its own, each one boring enough that it never makes it onto a list anyone shares for fun. The cash sitting in the wrong account, the deductible nobody revisited, the coverage that vanished with the last job, the liability gap nobody priced, the will that was never written, the fee nobody added up, the tax strategy nobody built, the screening nobody scheduled, the skill nobody paid for. None of it announces itself as urgent, which is exactly why it's still sitting there for most people, untouched, at the exact income level where fixing it would actually matter. Look at the list again and notice what it isn't. Not a car, not a watch, not a bigger house. None of that is condemned here. Spend where it genuinely makes you happy. But none of it was ever going to be the upgrade that mattered most. The 10 things that actually move the number are boring on purpose. Where the cash sits, what's insured, what's written down, what's charged, what's screened, what's learned. Every one of them costs a fraction of a status upgrade, and every one of them either protects what you've built or keeps adding to it long after the receipt is forgotten. That's the real difference between spending money and upgrading your position. One feels good for a weekend. The other keeps working long after you've stopped thinking about it. Quietly, in the background, for every year you leave it alone. The car and the watch will still be there next month if you still want them. Most of this list is cheaper today than the version of it you'll be forced into later, at a worse rate, under worse timing, when skipping it stops being a choice and starts being a consequence.